Welcome to TV, Tennessee Valley Church. Today we're in the studio of Imagine Ministries on Weatherly Road in Huntsville, immersed in the land of Israel via their amazing 360-degree projections. We're continuing the sermon series From the Promise to the Tomb, from Abraham to Easter. Last week we talked about the fact that for 400 plus years, the Israelites, the Hebrew people, had been slaves in Egypt. Then God spoke from a burning bush to an aging man named Moses and said, "Go tell old Pharaoh to let my people go." Pharaoh finally relented and the Israelites were freed. God appeared to His newly liberated people at Mount Sinai, renewed the covenant between Himself and His people, and then told them to go and take the land once occupied by their patriarch, Abraham, the land of Canaan, the promised land. In Numbers 13, we see Moses sending 12 spies over into the promised land on an exploratory mission. 10 of the 12 came back and said, "Well, this is impossible. The obstacles are too many. We can't take that land. We're like grasshoppers compared to these people." Joshua and Caleb disagreed. "God has promised us this land," they said, but Joshua and Caleb were outvoted. The Hebrew people surrendered to their fears. And so God said, after all I've done getting you out of Egypt, and now you stand in sight of the promised land, and you doubt that I can get you there, this generation will not enter the land I've promised. And the people of Israel spent 40 years wandering in the Sinai and Jordanian deserts. The Hebrew people decided God was, He was big enough to get them out of slavery in Egypt and across the Red Sea, but not big enough for that unknown land across the Jordan River with its complexities. The Hebrew people decided God was big enough for the simple problems of the past, but not big enough for the complicated problems of the future. A few days ago, when I was working on this message, I reached for a book on my library shelf. And when I pulled that book out, another book fell off. I smiled when I saw it. It was the classic, "Your God is Too Small." J.B. Phillips wrote that book in 1952. The world was changing rapidly. The atomic bomb had changed the world 7 years earlier, and the potential uses of nuclear energy were mind-boggling. World War II rocketry was now being translated into the beginnings of the U.S.-Soviet space race. It was the dawn of the computer age. In this 1952 book, Your God is Too Small, Phillips wrote that the trouble with many people today is that they have not found a God big enough for modern needs. Many people of his day were overwhelmed by modern scientific and technological advances, and God seemed outdated. Good, good for a simpler time, but not sufficient for modernity. Sound familiar? Today there is artificial intelligence and robotics and CRISPR gene editing, which I don't understand, but people who do are thrilled about. And to many today, as in Moses' day and in J.B. Phillips' day, God seems like an admirable relic of the past, a quaint, warm memory. Our God, our perception of God, is too small. Truth is, God is bigger than AI, DNA, and CRISPR. God was and is plenty big enough for 1500 BC and for AD 2025. And we need that big God today more than ever. With our technology advancing so quickly, it's hard for our ethics to keep up. And with all the conveniences and marvels we enjoy, our anxiety, stress, and depression are growing, not declining. We need to understand how big God is. God declares in Isaiah 55, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." For 4 decades, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, lived in the desert, complete with sun, snakes, and sandstorms. God took care of them by providing clouds by day and fire in the sky by night, by providing manna from heaven and water from rocks. Moses didn't live to see the promised land. An act of disobedience forfeited the opportunity Moses had to enjoy that land. Within sight of the land of promise, Moses died and was buried. Joshua was chosen by God as Moses' successor to lead the people of Israel the rest of the way. God said to Joshua in Joshua 1:9, one of the most encouraging verses in the Bible, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Joshua 3 shows us the people of Israel camped out on the east side of the Jordan River, preparing to cross over into the land of promise. The Jordan was a more formidable river than it is now, and Joshua 3 says the river was at flood stage. Joshua announced, "God said, step out into the river." And they did. As they began to move out into the river, the water from upstream came to a stop. Now the Israelites crossed the Jordan in the vicinity of Jericho. But the Bible says that the water piled up at a place called Adam or Adam, which was 18 miles or so upstream. Joshua 3:16 reads, "The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan." You can see that on this map. Let's think about something. They stepped into the water and the water stopped. But it didn't stop right there next to them. There was no wall of water right where they were. The water was dammed up several miles upstream. The Lord dammed up the water upriver, and the water stopped at the crossing point just as they stepped into the river. Now that means God cut off the water upstream before they were in the river. God was at work preparing the way before they took the step of faith. That's amazing. Are you worried about stepping out into the current? Well, God is at work upstream. If God's Spirit has prompted you to take a step of faith, the Lord of all creation is already ahead of you, preparing the way for that to which He has called you. So when you step out, you can be confident He is already at work. And they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. The crossing of the Hebrew people from the wilderness wanderings across the Jordan River into the Promised Land has long been a metaphor for the death of God's people. There are lots of songs like "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." "I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home." And then there's an old song that Johnny Cash recorded. "When I come to the river at the ending of day, when the last winds of sorrow have blown, there'll be somebody waiting to show me the way. I won't have to cross Jordan alone." Sometimes churches sing, "On Jordan's stormy banks." The third stanza says, "No chilling winds or poisonous breath can reach that healthful shore. Sickness and sorrow, pain and death are felt and feared no more." It's easy to see how people have associated the hardships of life, its disappointments, its illnesses, its pain, with the wilderness wanderings of the Hebrew people. And it's easy to see how the Promised Land could be associated with heaven. The late funny lady, Barbara Johnson, was a guest on a Christian radio talk show. For 2 hours, she'd been talking to callers and had said just about everything she knew. Then the host turned to her and said, "Barbara, we have just 2 minutes left. If you could say one thing to encourage all the people who are listening, what would you say?" And Barbara Johnson answered, "Well, there's one thing I would like to tell everyone, and it's this: life is hard, and then you die." "Well, Barbara," the host said, "maybe you could tell us in a few seconds why you think that's encouraging." So Ms. Johnson went on to say that with all of the pain and hurt of this life, it's encouraging to know that one day there will be no more sickness, wars, crime, and that pain. Our exit here is our grand entrance there. And she concluded, "We don't have a hopeless end. We have an endless hope." Settling into the Promised Land was a challenge. People who lived there weren't thrilled about the Israelites moving in, and the Israelites fought numerous battles for the land God had given them. The first obstacle to establishing themselves in the Promised Land was Jericho, a city just west of the Jordan River, a gateway of sorts to the land of promise, Canaan. It's in Jericho that we meet Rahab, the prostitute. When we come back, we're going to talk about her.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me, and all my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. Oh, and all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, and I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, and your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. And your goodness is running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
Imagine Ministries is working to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the whole world in creative and engaging ways. Dr. Kevin Dickelman of Imagine Ministries is here with us. Thank you for joining us today.
My joy. Thank you.
You've got, on Weatherly Road in Huntsville, you have a virtual Israel.
We do. And not just the 360, but there's so many more things here. We have a full replica of the Holy Place with the furniture in it, of the Ark of the Covenant, table showbread, altar of incense, menorah. We have a full archaeological collection here for people to come in and see and discover not just old pieces, but understand what the meaning was in those days and still today. We have a replication of the wall of Jerusalem where people can come and pray. We have a replication of the tomb where Jesus came out of, and by the way, it's empty. And then we are building in the process. We're in the building of what we call the archaeological dig experience, where people will be able to come and do archaeological digs, building up replicas, just as though they were actually buried in paleontology, Egyptology, Roman, Greek, and Israel.
And you said that the Holy Land is really the perfect classroom to learn about Jesus.
It is. If you go through the scriptures, you have to ask yourself the question when you study the Bible, who was speaking, where were they speaking, what was the significance of that place, what do they see oftentimes means so much more of adding the meaning to the text and the meaning of the Bible to us today. We had an experience with one of my tours in Nazareth. I stood on the Nazareth precipice just outside the village, And I happened to look around. I've even told people from the pulpit when I preached that Nazareth was an obscure village, and Jesus grew up in an obscure village, until I stood there and realized that around this village are 32 different stories from the Old Testament, from the very beginning of the Jezreel Valley to the very end, of the prophets and the priests and the kings. And where Jesus grew up was the world's most perfect classroom for his Father to teach him from the beginning to the end. And so from that place, I thought, we need to have a 360 here where we can bring this in and show people places in Israel where we can teach the Bible in ways that they had never seen before.
Where all can you take us? Just in this room.
In
Where
this
all
room,
can we go?
I can take you from Dan to Beersheba, as the Bible would say, from the beginning to the end. Okay, and I can take you from the northernmost part of Dan through Caesarea Philippi to Galilee and down the Jordan River Valley. We can stop at Caesarea Maritima, with the great port city where Herod built. I can take you to Jericho and show you the walls there. And we take you down to the Dead Sea and all the way down through the wilderness to the Negev.
What's led you to do this?
I had an opportunity to, I was mentored by a tremendous Jewish man in Israel, and I met him in Los Angeles when I was there as a pastor. And he invited me to go to Israel with him, and when I started going there and learning the land, he said to me, know the land, know the land, know the land. And I'll tell you, once you understand where you stand, I want to put more meaning to this. When God brings Moses to the burning bush, he said, take your sandals, you're standing on holy ground. The rabbis teach that Moses never wore those sandals again. For the steps that he would take from that place, those sandals could not carry him. But God would give him a new step. And I think that's the way it is in Israel. When you go to this place, you can leave the sandals behind you, because the steps you're about to take are going to take you more meaning than you ever experienced in your whole life.
And not everyone can travel to Israel
No.
because of, scheduling, financial responsibility, but you've actually brought Israel to South Huntsville.
And even fear. A lot of people are afraid to
Fear,
go.
afraid to go,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I understand that. We understand that. But yes, we've been able to bring to the stories of the Bible into a place here where you can sit in a comfortable location in Huntsville. It's pretty much safe in Huntsville. Okay, and because of that, we can teach the Bible in ways that you've never experienced in the visual and also the senses too, and all that.
Who's this open to?
Everyone. We want every single person in and around within about 7,000 miles of Huntsville to come to this.
Okay. We'll
Yeah.
put up your information on the screen so people can get in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
The genealogy of Jesus, as found in Matthew chapter 1, begins with Abraham. If we keep going down the list, we come to Matthew 1, verses 5 and 6, and we find Rahab. This is her story. Joshua sent 2 spies to scope out Jericho, for Jericho would be the first city that would offer resistance when the people of Israel crossed into the Promised Land. In Jericho, Joshua's spies stayed at the home of Rahab, the prostitute. Why there? Well, because given Rahab's vocation and reputation, the men's visitation would spark no speculation and thus require no explanation. In other words, strange men coming and going would have not been unusual at Rahab's place. Rahab hid the spies and told them, as recorded in Joshua 2, I know the stories of your escape from Egypt, crossing the Red Sea on dry land. Rahab said, I know God has given you this land, and that the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. When you come to Jericho, please spare my family, she pleaded. The spies agreed and instructed her, hang a scarlet cord in the window so that the soldiers will know which house is yours. Your family will be protected. When the spies left, Rahab followed their instructions and tied a scarlet cord in her window. Many have suggested scarlet was not a random choice, that it was the color of Jesus' blood and thus a sign of what was to come. Well, maybe that's true. But this I know, that cord said, here lives an imperfect woman with an imperfect family. Here lives a woman whom people judge by her scars and her regrets. Here lives a woman who recognizes how big God is and who wants to live as His daughter. Within a few days, Joshua sent his army to Jericho. First, they marched around the city, blowing the trumpets, and the walls crumbled, and the Israelite army took the city. Rahab's family was spared and taken into the Israelite community. What happened to Rahab? Well, it's really interesting. The Hebrew community took her in. An Israelite man named Solomon married Rahab. Rahab, a prostitute. Rahab, a Gentile, not an Israelite. The Bible doesn't tell us that story, but it has to be a story of inclusion, of acceptance, of grace. In Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, we find the name Rahab. Also in Hebrews 11, in what we call the Hall of Faith, there are names like Abraham, Joseph, and Moses, and Rahab. Rahab, with all the painful memories of all those men who came and went, leaving her more empty every time, who took her place among the beloved and admired. Because in God's family, there are no outside children. Beside the Troubled Waters is the autobiography of Dr. Sonny Herford III. The late Dr. Herford was a physician in Huntsville decades ago. Dr. Herford's son was the first African-American child to attend a white school in Huntsville. In his autobiography, the late Dr. Herford spoke of his father, Sonny Herford II. My daddy was the only child of Annie Herford and Matt Stewart, who lived together for a time and then separated right after he, Dr. Herford's father, Sonny II, was born. Dr. Herford wrote, "Daddy was what people called an outside child, which means he'd been born out of wedlock and raised by his mother's folks. The biological mother and the biological father of Dr. Herford's daddy, Sonny II, later married other people and had several children within those marriages. All of Sonny II's half-brothers and half-sisters were born to married couples, so they were all considered legitimate. Sonny II was always considered the outside child. Some of the Israelites probably looked at Rahab like an outside child, at least in the beginning. Maybe some never got over it. But Solomon and others said, "You're one of us." And God said, "You're my child, period." In the family of God, there are no outside children. God's grace, His unconditional, undeserved, unlimited, unrelenting love means there are no outside children in His family. Someone listening to me identifies with Rahab. You're ashamed of something in your past, and you wonder if you really belong. Please hear me. Don't ever let yourself feel like an outside child. There are no outside children in God's family. thank you so much for watching. It is an honor, and I mean that, to have you as part of our extended community. We know that there are people who watch who are new believers. We know that there are people who watch who have been followers of Jesus for a long time. We know there are people who watch who are just considering the Christian faith. Wherever you are in that, we are delighted that you watch. We really are. And we think this might be helpful. Things I wish I'd learned in Sunday school, a study of the basics of the Christian faith. Whether you might want a refresher, or maybe you would like to sit in the privacy of your own home or room or wherever you are and consider these basics of the Christian faith. This might be helpful. So we want to send you one, no cost of course, no obligation, just email publications@fbchsv.org, publications@fbchsv.org. They'll send you a digital copy, and you can use it however it might be helpful. We just want to say thank you. Thank you again for being part of our extended community.